Hey everybody, Ben here from DMC Films and Cinderblock Studios, and welcome back to another acrylic painting tutorial. Today, I'm finally updating my tutorial on painting a simple blue sky. So there's a few things about this tutorial I want to get out of the way before we even get to the demonstration here. First is that because acrylics dry at the rate that they do, I won't be able to treat this the way I treat one of my regular tutorials, which is explain what I'm doing, stop, explain some more, talk about my colors, explain, and then go back to painting. I can't do that because I need my colors to remain wet and workable, and because acrylics dry quickly, I don't have a lot of time. So everything's going to be that I need to say in advance, I will say in advance, and everything else I'll just work with when we get to the demo. So first up, unlike a lot of my tutorials, I'm going to be working on regular stretched canvas this time. A lot of my tutorials I work on paper, but there is a slight technique variable in this case because while I work on a canvas, I have to work a little bit thicker, and working on paper, I can work a little bit thinner. So I think it's important to show this technique on an actual piece of canvas because one, for this technique to work, you have to paint thicker anyway, and two, because, well, I'm actually going to be working on a painting with a blue sky, so it kind of helps. Painting on a surface like paper or even prepared wood doesn't have the same level of absorbency as canvas does, so to show this technique on those other two supports wouldn't really be doing it justice. So in using canvas versus paper, wood, cardboard, whatever, I'm going to be using more paint, specifically because I use heavy body paint. If you're using a different type of paint, maybe a soft body or a liquid, you probably won't need quite as much, but again, that lends it to itself as being just, it's heavy body, you're going to use more of it. But in using more of it, rather than having a simple washy kind of sky, you have a sky that's a little bit more meaty. So yeah, this technique is going to apply really to heavy body acrylics. Again, if you're using a fluid or maybe something like Liquitex soft body, you won't need as much paint to cover a larger area, so just take that into account depending on which viscosity paint that you're using. So in painting a blue sky, one thing you might want to consider is, okay, well, which blue should I pick for my sky? Most color theory sets are going to have something like a phthalo blue or an ultramarine. These are really good choices for skies, especially if you don't know a ton about a lot of the different kind of colors that are out there. In general, I tend to prefer a phthalo blue for a sky over an ultramarine. I just feel it has a slightly bluer look to it. I don't know what it is about ultramarine, I just prefer phthalo more. However, for this tutorial, I'm actually going on a slightly more alternative route. In place of using the phthalo, because after a while I'm probably not going to restock it on my palette, I'm going to create something that is similar to phthalo in the way that it looks, but not actually phthalo blue. We're going to be using cerulean blue chromium and some Prussian blue hue. I like these two mixed together to make a really nice sky color, and in general, I think in many ways they're a step up in both general color and hue, as well as in just general complexity than using just something simple out of the tube like an ultramarine or a phthalo. The two colors separately, cerulean is really good for a stylized sky as it has a much brighter, tends to be a little bit warmer of a blue. Meanwhile, Prussian blue is darker and grayer, and I actually love using it for like more stormy skies. The two together, between a nice bright daylight stylized sky and sort of a dark, dim, stormy sky, tend to make a nice, interesting, and happy middle ground. And of course, with that blue mix, you can't forget about regular titanium white, because, you know, that's what you need to make it look like the sky color. If you're looking for a little better breakdown on the which blues are good for sky and really kind of a side-by-side comparison, Tim Gagnier's got a great video, you can check it out over here, on just comparing the different blues by simply painting little color swatches and just holding it up to the sky and going, yeah, that kind of looks right. Okay, that's enough rambling. What do you say we actually get to painting here? A couple things to note about this canvas in particular is, one, it is a custom stretch canvas. I did this one myself, so the texture is a little bit rougher and a little bit sort of grainier, grittier than you might find on a traditional store-bought canvas. I also dropped myself a horizon line out ahead of time. This is about 4.5 inches from the bottom of the canvas. Now the actual bottom of the canvas is maybe about an inch or so off camera here, but that's not a huge deal since we're going to be painting a sky and, you know, not the land underneath it. Also, you may notice a little speck here. This is a bit of purple gouache that got on the canvas from flinging it around while working on another project. We're going to be covering this up eventually, but do note that at some point this may mix into our paint. Not a big deal. In addition to the canvas, you're going to need something to mix your paint on, some sort of a palette. Actually, I just noticed my canvas isn't quite where I want it to be, because in the lower right-hand corner of the screen here, you're going to see my glass palette off to the side. This is just organizational thing on my part, and should help make the video a little bit more watchable. Brushes for today. Now, there's a lot of different techniques for painting skies. A lot of them involve giant brushes. I'm going to show you today that you don't need a giant brush to paint a sky. So for this, I just have two flat brushes, very, very similar. Both of them have widths up at the top of about maybe 3/4 of an inch or so. It's a couple centimeters for those of you overseas. And you know, the other one's just a little bit older. We're going to use this in its dry state for blending as we go along. But this one is just sort of my old reliable, and on a 16x20 canvas, this is pretty much all the bigger you need. Now our blue mix for today, as mentioned earlier, rather than being a simple single color, is going to be a mix of cerulean blue chromium as well as some Prussian blue. I find that this tends to make a little better of a blue than a traditional ultramarine or phthalo. I just feel like it's a little bit warmer, a little bit cleaner, and has a little more depth to it. And of course, we'll need a bit of titanium white to go along with that as well. Now I want to make note that just because we're doing a blue sky today doesn't mean that this technique is just about blue skies. You can switch out to whatever colors you really want to, and this works really well too. So if you can master the techniques I'm showing you here today, you can use this to create a blue sky or an orange sky or a pink sky, or really whatever you want to create. And of course we have my regular water bucket here as well. I'll be dipping in that as I go along. So I'm going to go ahead and start laying out some paint down on the palette and get my mixes together. I'm going to throw this part into time lapse, so I'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, so to start things off, you see me, I'm using a regular painting knife here. This just helps speed up the process a little bit. You can use a brush, but then it's kind of important to clean your brush between going from mixing the paint to going to work on the painting itself. So a big part of this technique is not about painting thin or painting with a big brush, but painting with a lot of paint in more concentrated areas. This I find to be one of the, I wouldn't say least wasteful, but one of the most effective ways of painting a sky without making the sky look too watered down or too thin. So once you get your sort of blue mix together, whether you're using a just single out of the tube blue or a mix of blues like I am here today, it's important to add some weight to it because that pure dark blue is just not the color a blue sky looks ever. It's always going to be some variant of the blue sky mixed with white. So for this, really it's just about what you're going for. I'm actually working from a photo today, so I kind of want to make it match that at least to some degree. Again, as mentioned before, there's really no time to wait with acrylics, and while in many of my tutorials I can stop and explain what I'm doing, I'm not going to be able to do that today. So you'll just have to bear with me. I'll be giving you, tips and tricks along the way, but it's going to be really hard for me to kind of really stop and explain what I'm doing. And then, I'll have issues with the paint drying and not being where it needs to be. So to start out, I'm just going to dip my brush in the water just to wet the bristles. That's all I really need it to do. It doesn't need to be soaking wet. You don't have to leave it in there real long. Just enough to wet the bristles a little bit and then make the paint flow. I am using heavy body acrylics. If you want to make this a little bit easier on yourself, you can actually use Liquitex soft body acrylics that tend to work really well. One thing I'm doing to start is that I'm actually painting the edges of, at least the top few edges, of my canvas. Now this is not a requirement, but it is for me very much an aesthetic choice. So I wanted to make sure that that was done first so I don't forget about it later on. And with using heavy body, you can thin your paint out a little bit, and you're probably going to see me do that a little bit more than you probably have to. And the reason here is because my paint, or my canvas rather, is that rougher texture that I had mentioned earlier. If your canvas is a little bit smoother, you wouldn't really have to do that quite as much. Okay, so now I got my edge taken care of, we can just start working into the different color phases. And what essentially this technique works with, and what makes it so effective, is that you don't need really a ton of paint to blend with, but you just need enough to really kind of cover your canvas and give yourself a nice area to work with. So the easiest way for me to explain this is to do this sort of in phases. So we're going to do basically a strip of blue and a strip of lighter blue, and then blend the two colors in the center. And for me here, the easiest way to get that nice coverage to start is just to do simple little crisscross strokes. It's not nothing super fancy here. Not even really a secret technique. It's just one of the easiest ways to kind of get a nice solid bit of coverage. This way I'm making sure that I'm getting into all the little different grooves in the canvas, really without too much work, and not like really scrubbing it in. I'm just kind of laying it on real nice. And then once it's in, I can just kind of blend it out a little easier, get rid of all those brush strokes. And it's up to you if you want those crisscross brush strokes to stay in your painting or not. But okay, so one thing I'm doing right now is making sure that this first section, this sort of transition that we're going to be making, is a little bit thicker. So I want to lay a little bit more paint right here, because I know in advance that it's going to need that paint to both blend into the next layer, as well as make that layer kind of work and dry the way that I want it to. So from here I'm just going to go right in and mix some more of my white. If you noticed, I grabbed two piles. That was just me thinking ahead. At a certain point I'm going to need that pure white, so I may actually get a third pile for that as well. And one of the reasons why I put that so thick is because I just got rid of that blue color I just used. So that blue color that I just had, that's gone. So in doing this, it's all or nothing. You get one shot to get it there. Now I'm not going to come right up to this edge. I'm going to start this color a little bit lower. And if you start blending that ahead of time, what you end up having is you have darker blue when you want to get to your next transitional band, which tends to be a little bit of an issue. Again, for me, painting the sides is super important, so I want to make sure I don't forget about that as I go. So now I'm going to load up a bit of paint and start working on that, slowly getting it up to that line. And because we laid that on so thick before, I don't have to worry about it drying by the time I get there. Okay, so now we have that line. Now we just kind of start, same deal, crisscross strokes, blend it in together. And I'm going to work kind of from the bottom up, and then kind of come back right back down and in. And this is just one of the easiest ways to get that subtle blend. Don't be afraid to really use your paint. A lot of beginners want to just really conserve their acrylics, because while they are cheaper than oils, they are still a purchase that you make over and over and over again. And so it's important to really watch. Make sure you're not wasting your paint, but at the same time, you got to use it. I mean, it's paint. Lay it on there. That's one thing that, again, beginners make that mistake all the time. They just don't use enough paint, and their pieces kind of just look empty or lost or incomplete, just because they didn't layer it on really quite thick enough. Okay, that's our first transitional layer. And just like that, it's like that dark blue to that light one. Boom, boom. Those were distinct layers. They're not anymore. And if you make the two differences in those two colors a little bit greater, then of course that leap is going to be a little bit more difficult to blend in. But the more subtle you make that transition, the easier it gets. Grabbing more white. Now a regular blue sky, depending on where you live, you may be able to see a nice one or not. It's kind of up in the air, depending on your environment. But the blue sky is going to get lighter as it gets to the horizon. So I'm basically working my way to basically just a pure white. Blended that in a little too quickly there. But that's sort of the point of this. You start at a sort of a mid-tone blue, somewhere between the pure out of the tube kind of colors or the simple 2-to-1 mixes. And then you work your way towards a lighter color. In this case, it's white, so it seems more natural. For a sunset sky, you might be working from a red or a burgundy into an orange rather than being just blue to white. And you have that color in the center, and then you'll eventually work your way to a yellow for that section right on the horizon. So you're working dark to light to really kind of build that understanding of both light sort of getting lighter as it gets to the horizon or closer to the sun. Also, there's the understanding of atmosphere. You're going to get haze and mist the further away you get from whatever point you're at, wherever you're standing. And so for that, you really want to make sure you're mimicking nature, at least to some degree. Whether you paint realistically, abstractly, or you're doing something even more illustrative, your work has to still have a level of being believable in that way. So I know this is more of a demonstration than a tutorial, but hopefully you can take something from this. I mean, keep in mind here, this has probably only been maybe about 10 minutes, and I already have mostly completed sky here. I'm almost out of this blue. I'm going to need a lot more white, though. Luckily, I planned ahead enough to know that's about all the blue I needed. But at the same time, one thing you want to be sure in the first place is that you have enough paint to start with. It's okay to have extra paint. You can always store it and use it for another painting down the road. Whether that be just in like scooping it into a Ziploc bag, or if you're just have maybe a little box or a stay wet palette, you can do that as well. But it's okay to have more paint than you need. It's not okay to have less paint than you need, especially if you're doing big batch colors like this. So this color transition is going to be a little bit faster of a jump than we made previously. So for this, and you notice I'm not really cleaning my brush in between. I'm just going from one color to the next. That's really important too. You don't have to worry about rinsing your brush each time. So this color jump is going to be a little bit bolder, and I'm probably going to blend it up a little bit more as well. But for that reason, you want to be sure, again, that you blend properly. And the thing is, when you water down your paint, if you're not using enough and you're trying to blend it, then a lot of times what you're going to get is sort of little white spots in your painting. Well, doing a blue sky, it's not as big of a deal to have a white spot. If you're doing more of a gradient sky with an orange or a yellow, those little white spots are going to show through. And so when you use more paint and add water to that, it just thins out the paint. It's not going to eat away at your surface the way it would if you're just using either a thinner paint or something maybe of less of a quality, or even just not using enough paint in general. So in using more paint, in this case, when you add water, when I dip my brush, I don't have a problem of having that be too thin. It's that's the joy of painting thick here, is that painting thick in this instance gives you just such a more effective sky, because you can get those subtle transitions easier and easier and easier just by simply adding a bit of water to your brush. Some people will use a mist, a spray bottle for this, and that sort of works, but it can often drip, especially if you're working on an easel, so I try not to do that. Again, build up this lower layer. And the final layer for this, I can actually stop for a second and take a breath. Final layer for this is just going to be white, so I'll be a little bit easier on this. Now, I'm probably going to go a little bit underneath my horizon line, not a big deal. And for the first time, I'm actually going to go ahead and rinse my brush out. Okay. Take a breath. Take a relax. I'm actually getting a drink of water here. Excuse me. Talking for 15 minutes straight kind of gets you a bit thirsty. Again, a lot of my normal tutorials, I can cut the camera in between, do multiple takes. I couldn't do that today. So this is actually a little bit more like a live show in that sense, only with much better video quality. So I'm going right into the white now. Actually, I have a little bit of wetness here that I don't need. And I'm going to bring that white in right here. When I was, a couple years ago, I was at my brother's wedding out in Colorado, and I got to see how the sky behaved out there, which was really interesting. Because while you did get mist and haze by the horizon, you also got smoke from wildfires that were burning. So it actually had a little bit of an orangish amber kind of glow to the sky underneath, which was really, really cool. And it's one of those things where if you ever get to see something like that, not that wildfires are a good thing in most circumstances, but like you get high enough up on an elevation, and you can see how blue the sky can get with thinner atmosphere, but also it still has that transition to white the closer you get to the horizon. So whether you're right down at sea level or a little bit higher up, you're still going to get it might change a little bit. The closer you are to sea level, you might get more white. Further up, you're going to get more blue. But that getting that transition is really, really important to make your pieces seem a lot more natural. I'm going to wipe some of that off of my pants. I got way too much paint on my brush here, at least for my edge portion, because I really want to make sure that white part stays true. Now, one thing I do a lot in my regular acrylic pieces is I'll take white spray paint and just mist that horizon line in where that haze is. I love doing this because it gives, again, that idea of more of a misty horizon and not simply a clear sky. But again, that's an option that you can do on your own. Experiment with that. It's not really a place today for this tutorial. Okay, and just like that, I have a pretty simple little blue sky. I'll go ahead and just drop that in my water. Now you might be thinking, okay, what happened to that other brush? Well, this is where we're going to pull out that other brush. For this, again, I'm going to work from light to dark in this case, because if I go from this blue and start blending it out and then go into the white, I'm going to start getting things that look like clouds, which can be good, but not for this. So for your other brush, at this point, just look at your canvas, and if you see any brush marks that maybe seem out of place, anything like that, that's where you can sort of dry brush those out and just really play with getting a more subtle transition in certain spots. So for this, when I move to the next section, I'm actually going to wipe my brush off my pants on a rag or something to maintain that dry brush and make sure I'm not taking the two colors from one to the other. You want to make sure not to rinse your brush when you're doing this, because you need to maintain a simple dry brush to get those finer areas. Sometimes you will want to feel, okay, I want to add a little more water at this point. At this point, your paint's kind of tacky. So if you add water on top of it at this point and try to blend it out again, what you're going to end up doing is pulling that color away and actually doing similar to what you might think with a knife and scraping the paint off. You're essentially doing that with your brush by adding water to that tacky paint. So that's why it's really important here to use a dry brush while your paint is still a little bit tacky on the surface. That way you're only pulling the paint around and you're not pulling it off. That's something that I made that mistake way too often, especially when I was really learning to perfect my skills and push my skills further. Is that making that hard waterline transition on paint that's not completely dry yet but is starting to dry can really destroy the look you've already got going. I feel like that's pretty good. I did a lot of quick blending work. I've done it enough to know where I need to push those colors around while I'm working. But again, this at this point, it's really up to you how much you need to blend at this point. You know, you can do more vertical strokes. One thing I love doing is doing some vertical strokes and then pulling it back horizontally, because it really makes sure that the color blends really nicely. At this point, you could probably wait about half hour, 45 minutes for this paint to completely dry, and then you could just start working either clouds on top of this, or you can even start working on background, foreground elements. But for today, that is really all it takes to make a simple blue sky. It's probably a little bit longer than my original tutorial, but I really want to throw a lot more tips into this. For this technique to work, again, you have to paint with a good bit of paint. Paint thick. Whether you're using a heavy body or a soft body, don't be afraid to really use your paint and spread that across the canvas. Also, the first time you try and do this, it's probably not going to work, at least not work as well as it did for me. I've been doing this for a long time, so it's a lot about working from experience. You're not going to be able to get this to work for you immediately. You have to fail at it a couple times and figure out why you're failing at it. See, like, okay, that didn't work. Maybe I shouldn't add that much water. Maybe I should add a little more paint. Maybe I should add a little bit less paint. You're going to have to do it a few times. And a good way to practice this, if you're worried about wasting canvas, is get a few pieces of cardboard. Most retail stores, if you go in and ask for boxes, they will give you boxes. So it's really easy to get a hold of cardboard. It's not like something you have to go out and buy. So if you just need a few pieces of cardboard to practice on, go ahead and get some really anywhere that sells things, because things come in boxes. So you can get cardboard to practice on. And for acrylics, cardboard's a good practice medium because it is a little bit textured and will absorb the paint in a very similar way that it does to on stretched canvas. Now, granted, I was using about a little under a 1-inch brush for this. As you work bigger, it's okay to scale up your brushes. I actually have this brush from Blick called a Mega Brush. It's a number 40. It's just the size they're using for it. This is technically a fan brush because the way it spreads out, but it's really fun to paint, I feel, on a 18 by 24 or my choice size, which is 15 by 30, just to give yourself a little extra time to blend and relax with your paint. Do note, though, if you're using bigger brushes, again, you scale up your brushes, you need to scale up the amount of paint you're using. So the more brush real estate you have, you're going to have a lot more paint to cover that space. And of course, working smaller, you can work with a brush like we used today for a smaller canvas, because I feel like it works well and you'll get a nice wide blend to that and be able to cover the area. But again, don't be afraid to work a little bit smaller. If I was working on a 8 by 10 canvas, I might grab a brush about this size to put that sky in. You don't need a giant brush to paint a really simple, brilliant sky. And I hope this little demo today has really taught you that blue skies, pretty simple, pretty easy. Do it by experience, and it will work for you. So I know not all of you out there love these real long tutorials, but for me, it's the shortest I can do and still explain everything that I need to. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Hope you learned something. Be sure to subscribe for more, and this has been from DMC Films and Center Block Studios. See you guys next time.